My wife stood over my hospital bed and quietly asked the doctor how soon they could turn off the machines. She wasn't looking for hope. She was looking for an exit strategy. She leaned down and whispered 4 words that made my blood run colder than the IV fluid dripping into my veins. "Do what's necessary, Sterling." She didn't say it with tears in her eyes. She didn't say it with a trembling lip or the heavy weight of a woman facing a tragic choice. She said it with the cold, flat precision of a woman ordering a hit on a nuisance. She thought I was deep in the fog of a coma, a vegetable waiting for the harvest. She thought I was a prisoner behind my own eyelids, incapable of hearing the betrayal that was unfolding inches from my face. But I was awake. I was listening, and for the first time in our 10-year marriage, I was seeing Claire for exactly who she was. The ICU is a place where the world shrinks down to the size of a heartbeat. It's a landscape of white light, the smell of sharp disinfectant, and the steady mechanical rhythm of the machines that are keeping you in the land of the living. Beep, beep, beep. It's a sound that becomes your entire universe. I lay there, my body broken and wrapped in cast and bandages, feeling the phantom itch of a leg I couldn't move, and the dull, heavy throb of a head injury that should have killed me. 3 days ago, I was Thomas Vance, a man who thought he had everything: a thriving investment firm, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a wife who was the envy of every man in my social circle. I remember the rain. I remember the way the headlights of the oncoming truck looked like 2 angry eyes in the dark. I remember slamming on the brakes, only to feel the pedal go limp under my foot. No resistance, no pressure, just the sickening realization that the machine was no longer under my control. The crash was a symphony of breaking glass and twisting metal. Then, silence. When I first opened my eyes, or tried to, I was in this bed. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't speak. My jaw felt like it was wired shut, and a tube was shoved down my throat, breathing for me. But my ears worked perfectly. In the silence of the night, when the nurses were busy at their stations and the only light came from the blue glow of the monitors, I heard them. Claire and Dr. Sterling. Sterling was the chief of neurosurgery at this hospital. He was also a man I had known for years. I had funded his research. I had invited him to our Christmas parties. I had considered him a friend. Now I listened to his footsteps, heavy, expensive leather shoes, approach the side of my bed. "He's stable for now, Claire," Sterling said. His voice was different than the one he used in public. It was lower, more intimate. "The brain swelling is going down. If he keeps this up, he'll be awake by the weekend." I felt a surge of hope. I wanted to squeeze Claire's hand. I wanted to tell her I was still here. "That's not what we discussed, Marcus," Claire replied. Her voice was like a shard of ice. "Stable isn't what I need. Stable means months of physical therapy. Stable means he starts asking questions about the car. Stable means he looks into the accounts and sees what we've been doing." I froze. Every muscle in my body that was still capable of feeling went rigid. "The insurance payout is $10 million. Thomas had it written as an accidental death rider," Claire continued, her footsteps pacing the small room. "If he wakes up, that money stays out of reach. And the house? He'll never sell it. I'm not spending the next 20 years being a nurse to a man who's half broken. Look at him, Marcus. He's weak. He's already halfway to the grave. Why drag this out?" "Claire, killing a man in a hospital bed isn't as easy as it looks in the movies," Sterling said, but there was no protest in his voice, only calculation. "The staff monitors the dosages. If he flatlines suddenly, there will be an autopsy." "Then don't make it sudden," she whispered. I could feel her leaning over me now. The scent of her expensive perfume, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary, filled my nostrils. It felt like a suffocating shroud. "You're the doctor. Adjust the levels. Make it look like a complication from the head trauma. People die from complications every day. Do what's necessary. I want this finished by the time the board meets on Monday." I lay there, my eyes glued shut, every instinct screaming at me to jump up, to yell, to fight. but I was a prisoner in a broken cage. I felt Claire's hand move over my brow. She brushed a lock of hair back with a tenderness that made my stomach turn. "Poor Thomas," she murmured. "You were always so focused on the future." "You just didn't realize it didn't include you." They walked out of the room, the door clicking shut with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid. In the hours that followed, the darkness of the room felt like it was pressing down on me. I went through 10 years of memories, looking for the cracks I had missed. Claire had been the perfect wife. She was supportive, elegant, and always by my side, but I realized now that she was an architect of illusions. She hadn't been supporting me. She had been scouting the terrain. She hadn't been loving me. She had been waiting for the right moment to harvest my life. And the car, the brakes. I had just had that car serviced a week before the accident. The mechanic had been recommended by Sterling. The betrayal was total. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was a demolition. They had tried to kill me on the road, and when that failed, they were going to finish the job in the one place I was supposed to be safe. I realized then that I had two choices. I could wait for the complication to take me. I could let the clear fluid in the IV bag become my executioner. Or I could play the game. I'm an investor. I know how to read a market, and I know when to hold a position. Right now, my only asset was their belief that I was a corpse in waiting. I spent the next day practicing. Every time a nurse came in, I remained a statue. When the physical therapist moved my limbs, I stayed limp. I learned the rhythm of the hospital, the shift changes, the quiet hours, the sound of the cleaning cart. I learned how to breathe around the ventilator so it didn't look like I was fighting the machine. Claire came back that afternoon. She brought flowers, lilies, the flower of funerals. "He hasn't moved at all?" she asked the nurse. "No, Mrs. Vance," the nurse said, her voice full of genuine pity. "He's still deep under, but sometimes they can hear you. You should keep talking to him." "Oh, I will," Claire said. Once the nurse left, I felt Claire sit in the chair beside my bed. She opened her purse. I heard the rustle of paper, legal documents. "I brought the papers for the transfer of the firm's voting rights, Thomas," she said, her voice loud and performative, just in case someone was listening at the door. "I know you'd want me to keep things running while you're resting." Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I've already forged your signature, darling. Marcus helped me find a copy of your notary stamp. By tomorrow morning, I'll be the majority shareholder. Everything you built, every late night, every stress-filled deal, it's mine now. You really should have spent more time at home. You might have noticed that I stopped loving you 3 years ago. You became a bank account with a boring personality. And honestly, Marcus is so much better in the ways that actually matter." I felt the monitor beside me give a small, frantic spike. My heart rate was climbing. I forced myself to think of the coldest, darkest winter. I focused on the sound of the air vent. I pulled my heart rate back down, beat by agonizing beat, until the monitor returned to its steady, rhythmic lie. "That's it," she whispered, seeing the monitor stabilize. "Just keep fading away. It's better this way, for everyone." She left an hour later, leaving the scent of lilies and rot behind. I waited until the middle of the night. The hospital was in its deepest sleep. I felt the familiar presence enter the room. Dr. Sterling. He didn't speak to me. He didn't check my vitals. I heard him move to the IV stand. I heard the soft click of a syringe being uncapped. "Sorry, Tom," he muttered, "but 10 million is a lot of research funding. And Claire, well, she's a very persuasive woman." I felt him inject something into the line. A cold sensation began to creep up my arm. This was it, the necessary move. But Sterling made one mistake. He was so confident in my weakness that he didn't realize I had spent the last 24 hours doing something he hadn't planned for. I hadn't just been listening. I had been preparing. As the cold fluid moved toward my heart, I did the one thing they thought was impossible. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't scream. I reached out my hand, the one that had been hidden under the sheet, and I gripped his wrist, I gripped it with the strength of a man who was clawing his way back from the grave. Sterling let out a strangled gasp, the syringe falling from his hand and shattering on the floor. I felt his pulse racing under my fingers. He was terrified. He was looking at a dead man who had just reached out to touch him. I still didn't open my eyes. I didn't want him to see the fire in them yet. "Not tonight, Marcus," I whispered. My voice was a gravelly, broken wreck, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I let go of his wrist and felt him stumble back, hitting the medical cart. He didn't call for help. He couldn't. If he called the nurses, he'd have to explain what he was doing with an unauthorized syringe at 3 a.m. I heard him scramble out of the room, his footsteps frantic and uneven. I lay there, the cold fluid still stinging in my arm, but my heart was beating with a ferocious, vengeful rhythm. They thought I was a shell. They thought I was a victim. They had no idea that I had just turned the ICU into a courtroom, and I was the only one with the evidence. I reached for the small, hidden device I had managed to pull from my bedside drawer earlier that day, my smartwatch, the one Claire had forgotten to take because it was hidden under my wrist wrap. I tapped the screen. The recording had been running for 3 hours. I had her voice. I had his voice. I had the confession. I closed my eyes again and waited for the morning. I had a lot of work to do. I had a firm to reclaim. I had a marriage to end. And I had a wife who was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to bury a man who knows how to dig. The morning light was a brutal, clinical white that pierced through the thin hospital blinds. I heard the door hiss open and the familiar, heavy tread of Dr. Sterling's leather shoes. He wasn't alone. I heard the rustle of a nurse's scrubs and the rhythmic tapping of a tablet. Sound effect, rhythmic heart monitor beep. Steady and slow. Marcus sounded different this morning. His voice was tight, the professional mask strained to the breaking point. He went through the motions of a morning checkup, his hands trembling as he checked my pupils. I stayed perfectly still, a statue of a man, keeping my breathing shallow and my eyes rolled back just enough. I felt his fingers on my neck, searching for the pulse he had tried to extinguish only hours before. He knew I had grabbed him, but he was trapped by his own crimes. He couldn't report a miraculous recovery without exposing what he was doing in my room at 3 a.m. Before we go any deeper into the darkness of this hospital room, please take a moment to tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It reminds me that there is a world outside these white walls. Once the nurse left, the silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Marcus didn't leave. He stood by the window, the sound of his ragged breathing filling the room. "I don't know what happened last night," he whispered, his voice directed at the floor. "Maybe it was a reflex, an autonomic response. But if you can hear me, Tom, you should have stayed in the fog. It would have been easier." The door opened again, and the scent of lilies announced Claire's arrival. She sounded cheerful, almost buoyant. I heard the soft click of her designer heels on the linoleum. "Good news, Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum. "The board meeting has been moved up to tomorrow. I've already presented the forged power of attorney to the legal team. They didn't even blink. By sunset tomorrow, Vance Holdings will be under my control. We can start the liquidation by the end of the week." "Claire, we have a problem," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "What problem?" "Everything is falling into place. He moved last night." He grabbed my wrist. There was a long, frozen silence. I could almost feel Claire's gaze boring into my closed eyelids. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "The neuro report said he was 90% brain dead. He's a shell, Marcus. You told me that yourself. I'm telling you what happened. It was strong, like he was trying to crush my bones. Claire, if he's waking up, if he has any memory of the car or our conversations, then finish it," Claire hissed. I heard her move closer to the bed. I felt the heat of her anger radiating off her. "You're the doctor. You have a dozen ways to end this without leaving a trace. If he wakes up, we lose everything. I'm not going back to being a middle-class housewife, and you're not going back to a public hospital salary. Do what you have to do. Tonight, Marcus didn't answer. He just let out a long, defeated sigh. Sound effect, door opening and closing sharply. I lay there, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. I had less than 24 hours. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. I had to get word out, but the ICU was a fishbowl. Every time I moved, a sensor would trip. Every time I breathed too hard, a monitor would scream. I waited until the afternoon shift change. A young nurse named Elena came in to change my dressings. She was the only one who talked to me like a human being. She'd tell me about her dog, about the weather, about how she hoped I was dreaming of something beautiful. "Almost done, Mr. Vance," she whispered, her hands gentle as she adjusted my pillows. "I'm sorry it's so quiet in here today. I'll turn on the radio for you." As she leaned over me, I felt my chance. My smartwatch was tucked under my wrist wrap, the screen facing my palm. I needed her to see it without triggering the cameras in the corner of the room. I waited until she was positioned between me and the lens. I didn't grab her. I didn't want to scare her. I simply twitched my index finger against her hand. Elena froze. I felt her breath hitch. "Mr. Vance?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Did you just move?" I twitched again. 2 short taps. A signal. She didn't call out. She didn't press the emergency button. She was smart. She leaned in closer, pretending to check my IV line. "If you can hear me," she murmured. Tap twice. Tap. Tap. I saw her eyes widen through the slit of my eyelids. She looked at the door, then back at me. "Something is wrong," she said. "The doctor, he's been acting strange. He's been changing your charts." I slowly slid my hand out from under the sheet, just an inch. I turned my palm up, showing her the dark face of the watch. I used my other thumb to tap the screen, bringing up the last recording. Narrator. I watched her face as the audio began to play through her earpiece, the sound of my wife and her lover discussing my execution. Elena's face went from pale to ghostly white. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a real ally. She didn't say a word. She just took a small piece of medical tape and wrote a number on the palm of her hand. "My brother," she whispered. "He's a detective with the precinct. I'll get this to him. Just stay still. Don't let them know you're back." She tucked my hand back under the sheet, adjusted my blanket, and walked out of the room with a calm that I knew must have cost her everything. The rest of the evening was a descent into a private hell. I watched through my eyelids as Marcus returned 3 more times. He was twitchy, checking the monitors, staring at the IV bag like he was waiting for a sign. He was terrified of me, but he was more terrified of the life he was about to lose. At 8 p.m., Claire returned. She wasn't wearing her grieving widow mask anymore. She was dressed in black silk, looking like she was already attending my funeral. She sat by the bed and pulled out a small glass vial. "Marcus is a coward, Thomas," she said, her voice a cold, rhythmic chant. "He's afraid of the paperwork. He's afraid of the ghost in the bed. But I'm not. I've spent 10 years building a life I won't let you ruin with a miraculous recovery. You were always so proud of your investments. Well, think of this as the final payout." She stood up and reached for the IV port. Sound effect. Sharp, mechanical alarm. Heart rate spike. "Oh, is that your heart?" she mocked, watching the monitor. "Are you finally realizing what's happening? It's too late, Thomas. The board has the papers. The firm is mine. And in 5 minutes, I'll be the luckiest widow in the city." She uncapped a syringe, the needle glinting in the blue light of the monitors. I felt the tip touch the rubber port of my lifeline. This was the moment, the necessary move. I didn't wait for her to push the plunger. I opened my eyes. I looked her straight in the soul, and I saw the moment her world shattered. "The board doesn't have the papers, Claire," I said, my voice a jagged, terrifying rasp, "because the board is currently listening to this conversation." I raised my arm, the smartwatch glowing bright in the darkened room. I had initiated a live stream to my attorney and the executive board 5 minutes ago. Claire froze, the syringe trembling in her hand. Behind her, the ICU door burst open. It wasn't Marcus. It was the police, led by a man who looked exactly like Elena. Narrator. I watched them tackle Marcus in the hallway. I watched them pry the syringe from Claire's fingers as she began to scream, a high, ugly sound that finally drowned out the beeping of the machines. I lay back on the pillows, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. But I wasn't dead. I wasn't a shell. I looked at Elena, who was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Do what's necessary," I whispered to the officers, but as they led Claire away, she turned back, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred on her face. "You think you won?" she spat. "You think this is over? You have no idea what I've already set in motion, Thomas. Check the accounts. Check the offshore trust. I didn't just want your life. I wanted your legacy." The door slammed shut. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air. I looked at the monitors. My heart rate was steady, but I knew she wasn't lying. The demolition was deeper than I thought. I had survived the ICU. Now I had to survive the aftermath. The ICU is a revolving door of crisis, but once the police tape is cleared and the sirens fade into the night, the silence that remains is even more terrifying. It's the silence of a man realizing he is standing in the ruins of his own life. I was moved to a private wing of the hospital 3 hours after Claire and Marcus were taken out in handcuffs. The hospital administration was in full damage control mode. They provided a private security detail at my door and assigned Elena, the nurse who had saved my life, as my primary caregiver. They were terrified of a lawsuit, but I didn't care about their negligence. I was staring at the ceiling, my mind a battlefield. I was alive. That was the victory. But as I lay there, the physical pain of my broken body was nothing compared to the hollow ache in my chest. 10 years. I had given Claire 10 years of devotion, and she had spent that time measuring me for a coffin. Sound effect. Low, somber piano melody, building tension. Before I show you the true scale of Claire's final betrayal and the ghost I found lurking in my bank accounts, please take a moment to tell me in the comments, have you ever realized that the person you were building a life with was actually dismantling it behind your back? I value every story you share. It reminds me that I'm not the only one who has had to rise from the ashes. My attorney, Arthur Penhaligon, arrived at 8 a.m. He was a man who looked like he was made of iron and old leather, sharp, unforgiving, and exactly the kind of shark I needed in these waters. He didn't offer me platitudes or get-well-soon card. He sat by my bed, opened his briefcase, and laid out a stack of documents that felt like a second crash. "Thomas," he said, his voice gravelly, "the police have Claire and Sterling. The attempted murder charges are airtight, thanks to that recording. But Claire wasn't lying before they hauled her away. She's been busy." "How bad is it, Arthur?" I asked. My voice was stronger now, the tube out of my throat, but my words felt heavy, like I was speaking through a layer of silt. "Vance Holdings is a hollow shell," Arthur said, sliding a spreadsheet toward me. "Over the last 18 months, 60% of your liquid assets have been moved through a series of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. It wasn't just a slow leak, it was a planned siphoning." I looked at the numbers. $50 million. Gone. "She had help," I whispered. "Marcus couldn't have handled this. He's a surgeon, not a financier." "You're right," Arthur replied. "We traced the final signatures on the transfers. They weren't Claire's, and they weren't Marcus's. They were authorized by a third party, someone with deep access to your personal encryption keys." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. There was only one other person who had those keys. My younger brother, Julian. Narrator. The realization hit me harder than the truck on that rainy night. Julian. The brother I had put through college, the brother I had given a vice presidency, the brother who had sat at my Thanksgiving table and toasted to my health. "Where is he?" I asked. "He vanished an hour after the crash," Arthur said. His house is empty. His accounts are closed. We believe he's the one holding the offshore keys. Claire was the distraction. Marcus was the muscle to make sure you never woke up. But Julian is the one with the money. I lay back on the pillows, the mechanical beep of the heart monitor sounding like a mocking laugh. My wife, my friend, and my brother. A perfect trinity of betrayal. They hadn't just wanted me dead, they had wanted me erased. I spent the next 2 days in a state of cold, calculated fury. I didn't sleep. I didn't watch TV. I worked with Elena and Arthur, turning my hospital room into a command center. I learned the language of offshore trusts and ghost companies. I realized that Claire and Julian had been planning this for years, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. The car accident wasn't just a convenient tragedy. It was the starter pistol. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought I was a victim. They thought that once the money was gone, I would be a broken man, too busy with physical therapy to fight back. They forgot that I didn't build Vance Holdings by being soft. I built it by knowing how to find the cracks in a facade. "Arthur," I said on the 3rd evening, "I need to make a move, a necessary move." "What are you thinking, Thomas? You can barely walk." "I don't need to walk to win a financial war. I need them to think they're still winning." I instructed Arthur to leak a specific piece of information to the press, a headline that would travel fast. "Thomas Vance suffers fatal relapse in ICU. Estate in turmoil." Sound effect. Rapid, tense heartbeat rhythm. I wanted Julian to think the job was finished. I wanted him to think that with me dead, the final obstacle to the offshore accounts was gone. I knew the way Julian's mind worked. He was greedy, but he was also cautious. He wouldn't touch the main bulk of the money until he was sure I couldn't come after him. The news hit the wires at midnight. By 2 a.m., it was the lead story on the financial blogs. I sat in the darkness of my room, the only light coming from the glowing screen of my tablet. I was watching the ghost account, the one Arthur had managed to flag. It was a digital waiting room in a bank in Zurich. For 3 hours, it was silent. Then, at 4:15 a.m., a light flickered on my screen. Narrator. "A transfer request, $25 million, moving from the offshore trust to a private crypto wallet." "Got you," I whispered. The IP address was localized. He wasn't in Cyprus or the Caymans. He was in a luxury hotel in Miami, less than 3 hours away by plane. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I had something else in mind. I had Arthur contact the Zurich bank with a pre-recorded video of me, taken only minutes ago, looking very much alive, and a legal freeze order that had been prepared and signed weeks before I ever got into that car. I didn't just freeze the money. I reversed the flow. I watched the screen as the $25 million was pulled back from the crypto wallet and redirected into a secure escrow account under my sole control. Then, I initiated a script I'd been working on all day. I triggered a security breach alert on Julian's laptop. I wanted him to panic. I wanted him to see his fortune vanishing in real time. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later. An unknown number. I knew it was him. I answered, but I didn't say a word. "Thomas?" Julian's voice came through, high-pitched and frantic. "Thomas? Is that you? The news said, they said you were dead." "I've always been a slow learner, Julian," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I didn't learn that my brother was a thief until I was lying in a pool of my own blood. But I've learned now. Listen, Tom, it was Claire. She pushed me. She said you were going to fire me anyway, that you were looking for a reason to cut me out. I just wanted what was mine." "What's yours is a prison cell next to your sister-in-law," I said. "I've already sent your location to the FBI, Julian, and I've already drained the offshore accounts. You're sitting in a hotel room you can't afford, with a phone that's being tracked, and a name that is currently the most wanted in the state. Tom, please, we're family. Family doesn't cut the brakes on a rainy night," I said. I hung up. I felt a strange, hollow sense of peace. The money was back. Julian was cornered. Claire and Marcus were rotting in a remand center. But as I looked at the window, reflecting the sterile white lights of the room, I saw a shadow move in the hallway. Not a doctor, not a nurse. A tall, thin man in a nondescript suit. He didn't have a stethoscope. He had a silenced pistol. Sound effect. Sharp, high-pitched ringing. Sudden silence. I realized then that Claire and Julian were just the front. The legacy Claire had whispered about. It wasn't about the money I had. It was about the people I had crossed to get it. The hit on the road wasn't just a wife's greed. It was an organized execution. And the ICU was just the second attempt. The man stepped into the room, the door closing softly behind him. He raised the weapon, looking at me with the eyes of a professional who didn't care about my betrayals or my recovery. "Do what's necessary," I whispered to myself, mimicking Claire's voice. I reached for the panic button, but as my finger touched the plastic, the man spoke. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice a low, terrifying hum. "Your brother sends his regards, but your father, he sends his apologies." My father? My father had been dead for 20 years, or so I thought. The man didn't fire. He tossed a small black USB drive onto my bed. "The real legacy is on there, Thomas. If you want to live through the night, you'll stop looking for Julian and start looking for the man who paid for that truck." The man vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving the door slightly ajar. I picked up the USB drive, my hand shaking for the first time since the crash. I looked at the heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. I was alive, but the nightmare was just changing shape. The USB drive sat on the white hospital sheet, looking like a small black tombstone. My father had been buried 20 years ago in a closed casket ceremony after a plane crash that left nothing but charred metal and grief. I had spent 2 decades honoring his memory, building Vance Holdings as a monument to the man who taught me that a name is a person's most valuable asset. But as I reached for that drive, my hand trembling, I realized that the name I had been honoring was a ghost story told by a monster. I signaled for Elena to bring me my laptop. She looked at the door, then at me, her eyes reflecting the same terror I felt. She knew the man who had just left wasn't a doctor. She knew the rules of the hospital had been suspended. "Thomas, you need to rest," she whispered. "The police are downstairs. I can call them." "No," I said, my voice cracking like dry parchment. "The police can't fight a dead man. I have to do this myself." I plugged the drive into the port. My heart monitor began to pick up speed. Beep, 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 as the screen flickered to life. It wasn't just files. It was a mirror. Before I reveal the final, soul-crushing truth about the man who gave me life and the price I had to pay to bury him for the second time, please take a moment to subscribe to the Otis Archive. This channel is built on the voices of those who have survived the impossible, and your support is the foundation that allows these stories to be heard. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe blood is thicker than water, or is betrayal the only thing that truly runs in a family? The drive opened a secure portal. There, in high-definition video, was a man I hadn't seen since I was 18 years old. Victor Vance. He looked older, his hair a shock of silver, his face etched with a cold, predatory wisdom. He was sitting in a room that looked like a throne room made of glass and steel, overlooking a city I didn't recognize. "Hello, Thomas," the recording began. His voice was a carbon copy of my own, the same cadence, the same lack of mercy. "If you're watching this, it means Claire and Julian failed. I suppose I should be proud. I always told you that a Vance only loses when he stops paying attention. You've been paying attention." I felt the air leave the room. My own father, the hit on the road, the syringe in the night. It wasn't just a wife's greed. It was a father's audit. "Vance Holdings was never just a firm, Thomas," he continued, leaning into the camera. "It was a nursery. I faked my death to build the infrastructure of a shadow empire, and I needed you to build the legitimate front. You did a marvelous job, but you grew too large. You started looking into the offshore consulting fees. You started asking questions that Julian couldn't answer. I couldn't have you dismantling 20 years of my work just because your conscience started to itch." He sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "I told Claire to do what was necessary. I told Julian to take the keys. I wanted you to pass away quietly, a tragic hero of the financial world. But since you refuse to stay in your grave, I suppose I'll have to come and see the work myself. I'm coming home, Thomas, and this time there won't be a closed casket." The video cut to black. I sat in the silence of the ICU, the blue light of the laptop reflecting off the tears. I didn't even know I was crying. My father had killed me 20 years ago with a lie, and he had been trying to finish the job ever since. Every success I had, every deal I closed, it was all just more fuel for his machine. "Thomas?" Elena's voice broke through the static in my brain. "What was it?" "It was a death warrant," I said. "But he made one mistake. He thinks I'm still the boy who cried at his funeral." I looked at the spreadsheets Arthur had given me. The 50 million Julian had tried to steal. I realized now that Julian hadn't been stealing it for himself. He was funneling it back to Victor. The syndicate Victor had built was struggling, hit by the same global shifts that I had used to grow my own firm. He needed my liquidity to survive. He didn't just want me dead. He wanted my blood to keep his heart beating. I called Arthur. I didn't tell him about the video. I didn't tell him about the ghost in the machine. I just gave him a series of commands. "Arthur, the escrow account where I redirected the 50 million. I want you to use every cent of it to short V Capital and North Star Logistics." "Thomas, those are ghost companies. We don't even know who owns them." "I do," I said, "and I want you to flood the market. I want you to trigger the audit clauses on their European holdings. If we can't kill the man, we'll kill the money. Do it now." For the next 6 hours, I watched the world burn from a hospital bed. I was the useless husband, the brain-dead shell, and I was dismantling a 20-year shadow empire with a few taps of my finger. I watched the stock prices of my father's front companies plummet. I watched the news reports of a mysterious financial collapse in the shadow banking sector. I was doing what was necessary. At 5 a.m., my tablet buzzed, a message from Julian. It wasn't a plea for help anymore. It was a location, an old warehouse on the docks of the city. "He's here, Tom. He's coming for you. I can't stop him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at my legs. I could move them now, though the pain was like white-hot needles. I looked at the IV in my arm. I pulled it out, the blood blooming on the white sheet like a red lily. "Elena," I said as she rushed toward me, "I need your car keys, and I need you to call your brother. Tell him to meet me at Pier 14. Tell him to bring every man he has." "Thomas, you can't even stand." "I've been standing my whole life, Elena. I'm just finally walking in the right direction." Sound effect. Tires screeching on wet pavement. The sound of a storm breaking. I arrived at the warehouse just as the sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon. The pain in my chest was a dull roar, but the adrenaline was a shield. I walked through the side door, my cane clicking on the concrete, the sound echoing in the vast, empty space. There, in the center of the floor, sat my brother Julian. He was tied to a chair, his face a mask of bruises and shame, and standing over him was the man from the video, Victor Vance. He didn't have a silenced pistol. He had a glass of wine. "You look like hell, Thomas," he said, not even turning around. "I learned it from you," I replied. "I learned how to look like a corpse and still win the deal." Victor turned, his eyes scanning my broken body with a terrifying clinical detachment. "You bankrupted the syndicate. You cost me 20 years of work in 6 hours. I should be angry, but honestly, I've never been more impressed. You truly are a Vance." "I'm not a Vance," I said. "I'm the man who's going to make sure your name never appears on a headstone again, because this time there won't be a body to bury." Victor laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "And how do you plan to do that, Thomas? You can barely hold that cane. Julian is a coward, and the police are 20 minutes away. I'll be gone before they even pull into the lot." "I didn't call the police, Victor." I said, leaning my weight against a steel pillar. I called the people you've been stealing from for 20 years. The Russian investors, the cartel leaders whose money you managed into your own pockets. I told them where to find the man who lost their $50 million. The color drained from my father's face. It was the first time I had ever seen him look human. You wouldn't, he whispered. You're my son. I was your son, I said, until you told my wife to do what was necessary. The sound of heavy engines filled the warehouse. Not sirens, dark, armored SUVs. The people who didn't care about courtrooms or evidence. I walked to Julian and cut his ropes with a pocket knife Elena had given me. I didn't look at him. I didn't forgive him. I just gave him a chance to run. Go, I said, and if I ever see your face again, I'll finish what the truck started. Julian ran into the shadows, a broken man who would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. I turned back to my father. He was standing by the glass windows, watching the SUVs circle the building like sharks in the dark. Thomas, he said, his voice finally trembling, don't do this. I can give it all back. We can rebuild together. The foundation is rotten, Victor, I said, turning toward the exit. I'm just performing the demolition. I walked out of the warehouse as the first of the men stepped out of the SUVs. I didn't look back. I didn't listen to the sounds that followed. I just walked until I reached the edge of the water, watching the sun finally break through the clouds. I returned to the hospital an hour later. Elena was waiting for me in the lobby. She didn't ask questions. She just held my arm and helped me back into the wheelchair. Is it over? She asked. The ICU is over, I said. But the recovery is just beginning. Claire and Marcus Sterling were sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder. Julian was caught by the FBI at the border 2 weeks later. He's currently serving 15 for racketeering. My father, his name was never mentioned in the papers. He simply vanished. Again. But this time I know he's not coming back. Vance Holdings is no longer a nursery for shadows. I liquidated the firm and used the remaining assets to build the Vance Recovery Center, a facility for victims of domestic and financial abuse, a place where people can wake up from their own nightmares. I sit on my balcony now, the ocean breeze cooling the fire in my lungs. My body is a map of scars, but my eyes are open. I don't jump at the sound of a beep anymore. I don't fear the dark. I learned that the most necessary thing a person can do is decide who they are when the world thinks they're nothing. Thank you for watching this journey through the ruins and the rebirth. If this story reminded you that you are the only one who holds the keys to your own life, then my work is done. Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly value every story and every voice in this community. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otis Archive and share this video with someone who is currently fighting their own shadows. Take care of each other, stay vigilant, and remember, the most powerful thing you can do is listen when the world thinks you're silent.